And we're live. There it is. Welcome to Virtually Connecting. I'm Joe Murphy, the director of the Center for Innovative Pedagogy at Kenyon College. And I'm excited to be talking to folks at the Connected Learning Summit 2018 today. Michael, why don't you introduce yourself, and then we'll go to our on-site folks.
Sure. I'm Michael Berman. I'm the Chief Innovation Officer at California State University, and I'm coming to you from Long Beach, California this morning.
And folks at the summit, say hi.
Hello.
Hey.
Hi.
Hi. So I'm John Okewole, and I'm an instructional designer and a researcher at Yaba College of Technology in Lagos, Nigeria. So I'm here at the conference.
Wonderful. I'm really connecting. I'm Chad Dorsey. I'm president and CEO of the Concord Consortium in Concord, Massachusetts, and Emeryville, California.
I'm Sherry Shee. I'm a researcher and the executive vice president of the Concord Consortium.
And I am Judy Perry. I am a researcher here at MIT in the Scheller Teacher Education Program and the Education Arcade. So welcome to Cambridge.
Hey, Greg Dillon. I'm instructional designer at New England College of Business, and this conference has been amazing.
Quick hello. AK here from UMass Boston. I work for the Applied Linguistics Department, and I guess I am the resident ed tech troublemaker.
So AK, I think during the presentation, it looks so funny when your heads pop in. I think you should like crouch in the middle, and all of a sudden your head could pop up, and you could say something. You're really great.
It's a very Muppety effect. We'll see if we can get Henson Studios to do some virtually connecting with us.
Excellent.
So I love to ask, what kind of things are you guys learning at the conference?
Let me jump in real quick with one thought. From my experience, we started with an amazing keynote with Baratunde Thurston and Joy Ito, thank you. And one of the most impactful things that Baratunde said was that communication does not begin with your point, it begins with connection. And I think throughout my experience at this conference, everything has gone through there. Every single session has really, everybody's really connected to that amazing point, really around humanization to create learning. And it's often through playfulness in a lot of what's happening here at the conference. And
we're against that here.
At your sessions, I've definitely seen that.
I really enjoyed meeting so many different people from different parts of the world, and also people who are working in different sectors in education to bring connected learning to people. And that's been really nice, back to this connection.
Right.
And I really enjoyed the keynote, which focused on and brought the point around humor,
right.
And humor being a way of connecting. And oftentimes I find humor is almost difficult because you're trying to communicate with someone from a different culture, but somehow he was able to bring some really great examples and show how that could work.
Absolutely.
I've been struck by people's thinking about how, as a designer, how do you design spaces to make space for connectedness, and whether that's constructionism, where people are making a product, and then by talking around that product, that's the space that you're connecting, or whether families themselves together are building, some of Rick Rose's work, or if we're talking about, humor making space for breaking down barriers. I mean, all of these interesting kind of, not so much even definitions, but like ways to manifest a space to connect. And it's not just the technology, but the way that people connect, and the roles or the attitudes and everything that they're bringing, the whole ecosystem of learning, going beyond just whatever that little isolated space is, and thinking much more broadly. I mean, even the logo of the conference is all these lines going in different directions. I think that's really telling. I feel like we're all these lines interconnecting and going in our directions. And I think it's really just been great hearing the diversity of all of those ideas.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it seems like connecting is the big metaphor, literally and figuratively, because we're not only connecting in all of those ways between people and ideas and spaces, but it's clearly been a connecting of two quasi communities as the two groups of the GLS and the DML have come together, and I'm seeing people discovering one another and one another's worldviews on sort of the making the craft, the things that they're doing at the same time. So.
Integration is key for working together. And we've got to look at it from how do I find myself in your world and how do you connect to my world? And that's where we kind of like find the path to kind of like, okay, yeah, I can do things with you and all that. We can actually relate. And I found out that for everyone that comes to the hall this weekend, you find something that is plausible that you can actually relate or connect with that person. I did something weird yesterday. Greg knew about it. I've got Devon Steven was presenting something. I said, you know, the title of our poster was "A Family That Codes Together," blah blah blah. When I first saw the poster, and I'm kind of like, wow, this is something I need to hear about. So when the poster session started, I kind of like now saw a woman with a heavy belly. I'm kind of like, wow, I connect with that. I just had a baby on Monday, so yes. So now when she now said those things that she was doing, practically it was in my world too, you know. So now something got us together, from the title to the fact that she's pregnant and all that. But I saw what she's doing as connected to me. So at every point in time, we'll find out that there's something that gets me into your world and there's something that gets you into my world. And from there, we can actually move on, whatever connection that we. And that's what I keep saying all around this program and this conference. And it's been really wonderful.
One of the things that strikes me, and I heard this a bit as a criticism, but it got me thinking. So the criticism was, it's too theoretical. And then I'm thinking, well, it doesn't sound very theoretical to me. I mean, there's a lot of interesting theory and a lot of ways to get things like collectible card games into the classroom and like think about these things, think about Minecraft, Zumbinis. I didn't know what Zumbinis were, and I was playing those types of games in the 90s. But I guess the sort of what people were expecting, that they were saying it was too theoretical, was that you then get a sheet that said step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, here's how you use this technology. And I'm thinking you have to be receptive to connect, and you have to be receptive to think about these types of things. So is it too theoretical? Maybe, depending on what your starting point is. But if you connect with people, then you can start seeing examples, and you can start to collectively and collaboratively brainstorm how these things might potentially fit with your environment and how you can use these concepts, these tools, the games that weren't even built for learning, as a learning opportunity.
That was something that really struck me about this conference, having been to this conference before when it was DML, digital mediated learning, that there was definitely a maker community that was here. And there was a librarian community as well. There are folks from science centers that fill this intermediary space. There were also game designers who came. And there were lots of entrepreneurs, whether or not they were at a university with an aspiration to be a game designer, or they were entrepreneurial companies that were trying to understand and how to support and be part of the ecosystem that would support connected learning in the future. So it was really neat to see all these pockets. I always forget higher education too. But yes, there were professors and scholars here as well from the university. That was really nice.
And I think Judy talked about the diversity of the whole setup. You know, the librarians was kind of like, yeah, we're here. The academia, yeah, the entrepreneurs. And, you know, it's kind of like make us to realize that for everything that each and everybody do, it's imparted on others. So you don't kind of like say, oh, like you talked about silo this morning. You don't have to kind of like think you exist in a silo, because there's really no silo, because you always need someone else. So you don't have to kind of like, oh, come on, it's for this, and okay, I don't associate with this. No, that's not a spirit. The mindset is that, okay, what I'm doing, how does other people benefit from it, and how does it comes back to what I do? And that's what I see connected learning to be. It's kind of like everybody is kind of like seeing different kinds of people from different world. And when you talk about Baratunde was actually telling me something, it's kind of like Well, when I got in front, I was like, all the professors are going to be here. How am I going to speak to them? But by the time he got out of the stage, he was like, oh, these people, I connect with them really. And that's the truth. That's how it comes back.
Did any of you guys have a favorite session that you went to? Because there were so many sessions that I know that there were about 600 people at the conference and multiple strands, and definitely that sense of free choice that you could start halfway in or you know, leave one session, join another, between sort of plenaries and lectures with kind of hands-on sessions.
Yeah, I mean, there was a decent mix. I think is where they're trying to find the same kinds of mixes of sessions that both DML and GLS have had. You know, for me, the Cornell lab folks who were doing games had a nice session that was very, you know, full for the room. Just, you know, sort of showing the games, thinking about some of the principles behind them, and also having some fun with them. And it was the kind of session you wouldn't have seen except for in these kinds of conferences. And I think people were getting things at all leveled out of it. I mean, there was enough of the design and academic sense that people were getting those takeaways to some degree. And there was just some inspiration because, you know, watching somebody beatbox with animal sounds from around the world is pretty interesting and makes you think about new things. So, you know, I don't think you would see that other places. And it was it was only a half hour. It was short, and, you know, sure, it could have been an hour, but it didn't need to be. And so it was a nice example, I think, of the kind of thing that, you know, this conference can give that other ones can't.
I think that. Sorry.
I have a question.
Go.
This is fascinating, and thank you so much. I'm really getting a sense of what it's like there. How many people? Just one quick question, then I want to go into something else. How many people are at the conference roughly?
That's a great question.
I think I saw a number around 600.
I think, yeah, Eric said 650 or 600 or something like that. It doesn't feel like that. It feels more like 250 to me. Partially because of the space and partially because of the, I don't know, I guess the way that it's gathering. So, you know, to give a feel for it, it's in the Media Lab, which is, you know, very futuristic, you know, surrounds lots of interesting things. We walked past personal robots on the way here. We're sitting eating lunch next to tables that change their shape depending upon what you're doing near them. So there's lots of interesting technology sort of in the space, lots of glass and big open areas. And the majority of the convenings happen in sort of a fluid space that's, you know, a big room that holds 300 to 400 people, and then a spillover room next to it that has some tables out on a big porch that overlooks big parts of Cambridge. And so that kind of flow makes it feel as if you can see lots of people, is sort of the Media Lab notion, at the same time as so you feel almost more connected to the people than you might physically be. But it also feels more intimate. I guess it has felt more intimate to me than 600 people in a hotel ballroom feels.
Yeah, I'm really interested in that, the interplay between the number of people, the physical environment, and perhaps the cultural environment. So it sounds like they've pretty well hit a sweet spot there for all of you.
Definitely the Media Lab lends itself to that. I mean, there are other things it probably doesn't lend itself to. So it's not necessarily, it's not been horrible to get to different, you know, workshops, but they're not necessarily easy. You don't have to go, people haven't had to go outside all over, but you do have to. This is MIT, so you have to realize that we're meeting in E14-673, and you have to decode that somehow and know what that means. And there are things that are downstairs and upstairs and across, so that there's maybe less connection because of that than there might be because of the venue. But
there's a second building so that you did have to walk out. And just to give people a little context, it's really warm and humid here. You know, coming from California, where it's, you know, always in the 70s and kind of dry. So
sorry about that. I take responsibility. I guess as a
better than
Long Beach is probably pretty close to Emeryville in weather. We're just south of Los Angeles, for those of you who aren't familiar with California, but on the water. So I want to ask you, I want to go back to the thing you mentioned about humor being kind of a subtext, or kind of I would say perhaps a tool or a part of the culture of this meeting. I don't know if that's always been the case or if that's a particular theme this year, but I want to ask you about, as somebody who uses humor a lot, and sometimes it works well and sometimes it doesn't always work well. I'm curious about how people navigate humor, because I think while there's tremendous benefit in the humanity of humor, right? There's the vulnerability that can come from humor, but humor can also be aggressive, as we know. So humor can be a way to express aggression. It can be a way to distance oneself, and can be a way to create an in-group and an out-group, or to attempt to put down a particular subgroup or whatever. We all know that exists. And then there's also the fact that humor is so deeply culturally situated. So I'm curious, and John particularly, you may have observations about this coming from a somewhat different culture. There's always a risk of creating an in-group that understands the jokes, and other people say like, well, it's nice, I see they're laughing, but I have no idea what they're laughing about, because they've referenced some particular, they've got a cultural reference. It could be a TV show, it could be musical, it could be politics, it could be just something that's, you know, a meme that's not a universal.
Buffering there.
Oh no.
Please don't be an Ethernet issue.
It exists within it. You have discussions about that, about the sort of the risk benefits, and what are your thoughts now? Have you learned anything that we can apply as we use humor, or things that we should be thinking about as we use humor with students, in the workplace, in public? I'd love to hear your reflections on that.
Okay, thank you very much. I think the first thing I'm going to say is humor is a general thing for everyone. There are, like, back home from Nigeria that I came from, we have stand-up comedians and all of those things, and I think it's a way that people kind of like get to talk about things, and there's no kind of like too much attachment to it, and it's kind of like, okay, yeah, it's humor, yeah, we can always laugh about that. And basically, if you talk about the American culture, well, where I grew up from, like someone was asking me, yeah, I grew up, like, you know, from an English language perspective, so I kind of like get most of the things that I said quite well, you know, so that's never a problem. And I know a lot of things about the American culture. You know, the internet has actually brought us so close that what's happening, I might even have more information than you do, you know, about what's happening right here, you know, so that's interesting. So, but now the fact that humor comes into it makes it kind of like much more in a relaxed mood. And something about learning that I've realized is this: learning requires you to be kind of like, you know, in a ground state. Don't kind of like too much agitating and all that. That's when it sinks in. But when you kind of like, or like a student that wants to get ready for a test, you know, the kind of like apprehensive nature and all this, when you say anything at that time, they would definitely not get so much of it, you know, because their mindset is kind of like, but if it's like at the rest state and they are like, okay, yeah, it gets them closer, and whatever you have to say, they absorb. And that's what I see that is actually being, you know, preached out in this kind of situation, because now, okay, learning is not supposed to be kind of, it has to sink in, but for it to sink in, your state of nature needs to balance well to be able to absorb the learning. And that's what I've actually been able to get out of from it. And it's really drives home a whole lot of things, because I was telling someone, I said, now, do you know what? If you're dealing with young kids and you're kind of like telling them, oh, this things, and you not really make it to come through humor or something like that, or game or something, they will feel disconnected at some point. But if you're breaking from what they're doing, it's kind of like introducing humor. That's why gaming is very beautiful, you know. So they get into it and they can start to ask you questions, because that's when you kind of like connect with them, you know, which is very, very key. So that's what I've actually seen being reinforced over time. I attended a session, and Anne Demali of it's from Champlain, and the first thing was that she, when we met first before the first keynote, and she talked about the fact that, yeah, soccer is part of the game. I said, wow, soccer. People are like excited about it. Okay, bring it, because young people, they are very, very, you know, from my own part, they love soccer. So if you want to get them, just put soccer on the table, and everyone will kind of like crowd there and say, yeah, I'm going to play this. Then whatever you want to pass across to them can actually get through. But you've gotten something like a bit to actually get them in. So now humor from humor to gain to learning, it's a kind of an integrated way, which really works pretty well, rather than just kind of like, yeah, push the theories across and everybody's kind of like, what's this? Okay, no, I don't know. I don't need it. Do I need it when I get out of school? I don't need it, so I don't need to know about it. You know, so, and that's the approach. So that's what I've actually learned anyway.
Yeah, I would build on that just to say that, you know, I think on the one hand, we know enough about the brain to know that when you're in that lizard brain, that amygdala state, you can't bring things in. If you're if you're sort of fearful or if you're apprehensive, you're really not able to process things in the same way. So there's a lot of, you know, theory that goes behind that, supporting that. And, you know, I would just second the other side of what I'm hearing you say, which is, maybe more to push back on the question to some degree. I think humor was a strand in the opening keynote that linked well because of play being the kind of one of the core elements of both of the conferences that have come together here. And play is at the heart of what I think you're talking about, is a thing that, whether it's learning or not or what have you, it puts you in a space, in a magic circle, where reality is suspended and where you are inherently connected to somebody else. So you can't not be in that receptive state and be playing. And it doesn't have a particular purpose. It's just a thing. So connecting and play are almost one and the same. And it feels like that's one of the spaces that these conferences are talking about, you know, being a place where all of a sudden then all the things are open, right? Then we're not lecturing when we're playing, right? Like, but inherently we're not, because it just doesn't work that way. So then you're in a place where you can connect.
Oh, go ahead. I mean, everything you're saying, you know, resonates with me. And I was talking with another person who was an international attendee, and she was saying, oh, I was really struck by how informal the presenter style is. So they weren't, you know, she said in conferences I've been to, it's much more formal, and it's the you know, you and them, and it's a stage, and it's the research. And she was really struck in a positive way by how people were talking as if they're talking to another person who's sitting next to them, and not just kind of, you know, on a stage. And she said that, you know, she's like, now I'm thinking about all of these things that were said to me in a different way, and I'm kind of processing them, and I'm chewing on them, because it's not just that. So I think there's a piece of that that's just, it's not just informality, but it's inviting, you said a playful kind of participation. Like, I'm not just giving you this information. It's much more of a conversation that we're having, you know, together. Which is interesting. Did you either find that yourself or hear that from other people about this, just the style of the conference? Is that seem pervasive to you, or is it?
Well, even in the way of the dress of the participants, you know, it's very casual and it's very inviting, and yeah, kind of informal in that sense. For the humor that was mentioned on the first day of the keynote, on the second keynote, Michelle King, who's a middle school teacher, started telling jokes about, and I don't remember the label she gave herself as something educator, but she had said learning instigator, and she said, you know, it's good to have one word, you know, to describe yourself, like Beyonce, Shakira. And then the minute she started saying these things, and whether or not you knew who they were, people thought it was funny, right? And she carried that sense of humor in her, and casualness in her presentation. It was very warm. And then towards the session we just got out of, which was a wrap-up session with Kurt Squire, Constance Steinkuhler, who else was there? Mimi Ito and Scott Osterwald. And they were basically asking for feedback about the conference. And you had given some feedback. And it was quite serious in nature in the conversation. But you paused and said, I'm going to use humor in my question, which I think really kind of broke that tension a little bit. And we were like, okay, we're not here to attack. We're really here to understand each other. I thought that was really beautiful, how we took humor kind of throughout the 3 days as a strand. And it was playful. It was, to your point.
Yeah, and I think the interesting thread that's also connecting that did come out of the keynote was, one of the biggest takeaways for me was Baratunde saying, we brought some pieces of it out, but talking about doing stand-up at first and missing because he didn't ground himself as an identity with the audience and find a way. So they would say, you know, you're not funny, but it was really not saying you're not funny. It was almost this existential notion of, you're not funny because I don't know who you are. I don't know how to place you and how to put this, you know, and essentially saying, I don't know how to connect with you, so I can't. And I think the pieces that we're talking about here are as much about that as anything, which is to say, you know, if I know who you are, then I'm interested. Or if I know who you are when you're speaking and there's not this formal distance, then we're on a different plane of connection. And, you know, I think there has been some of that here in some of the other conferences, even more so. We talked about some of that in the debrief today. At GLS, it was very much the case that there weren't those lines, and it was deliberately not. So there might be a keynote, and then after the keynote, that person was in a fireside chat for 45 minutes, and who cares? You know, anybody can go and sit down next to them and, you know, pose whatever question you want. And just, so basically the notion that somebody was up on a dais and not, you know, part of it was just erased entirely, because then you saw them playing some crazy shoot 'em up video game in the big arcade at the same time, or having a beer out on the plaza. And, you know, so this, like, you didn't even have to say connected, because it was just sort of there in the fabric. And that brings a whole different notion to the kind of experience of a conference, I think, than is usually the case, where you've got the presenters and the listeners, and never the twain shall meet. Yeah.
It reminds me a little bit of this dichotomy of, you know, too theoretical and the need for a checklist or a procedure. And Baratunde's talk, when he wasn't funny, well, when he started off and he wasn't funny, was because he was following a checklist. This is what I do first, then I do that, then people laugh, then I do this. He wasn't really thinking, or at least what I took out of it was he wasn't connecting.
Right. The funniest moments were when he connected with the audience.
And he connected with himself too, I think that's what I took out of it, because if you can't really connect with yourself, no matter what sort of best practice, and best practices in air quotes, you know, you're not going to connect with the audience you're intending to connect.
It was nice because it was framed as a conversation with Joey Ito.
Right.
Yes.
And Joey started to tell a story, and parts of it where I guess he contrasted his educational style and experience with his sister Mimi, who is, you know, a good student who, you know, and he, I guess, apparently had dropped out of school or something, or ran away from kindergarten, and had to find alternative ways of engaging and learning, and it was kind of a nice story.
Yeah, well, and the tables flipped in that already from the kid was kicked off with the conversation that was clearly, you know, Joey's going to be leading the conversation because he's a Media Lab head, etc. But, you know, it flipped pretty quickly. Baratunde started to ask him questions, and then it became this, you know, very much more of a conversation than you might frequently have, where somebody's interviewing somebody. So from the very beginning, it was, you know, there aren't roles or nation. Basically, and you know, they were talking about personal stories and something. So the whole notion of connecting, which to me I'm seeing and hearing in this conversation, is basically like we're human first, right? And then things get laid on top of that, learning, fun, something. And in the cases where that's not the situation, then something is missed at the very least, if not anything else. And the people who are amazing, even if they're up on the dais, the people who are amazing speakers, we were just talking about this, you know, we hear some of the people who speak, and it's just you're connected to them, and you're the only one in the room, even though there are 3,000 people. They're the ones who are human always, and then the things get laid on top of that. So that, you know, to me, this part of what's coming out of this for me is, you know, like human first, learning with it, play with it, connection with it, and if not that, then nothing almost.
I enjoyed those Ignite talks. Did you guys enjoy those? So it was kind of at the end of the day, they had these 5 or 10 minute?
5 minutes.
5 minute Ignite talks.
20 slides, 5 minutes, 15 seconds per slide.
And
we'll auto advance. Yeah.
And you got a sense
of from personal experience.
Yes. Which is about 3 sentences.
But I just really enjoyed them, and that you really got a sense of the diversity of the participants in there, whether or not it was a teacher who's the first time they were giving this kind of Pechakucha style talk, to kind of more polished, kind of back to the words. The theme of the conferences was create, play, and mobilize. And this is part of the mobilization, where some of them were very much a call to action. Some of these talks of the it really struck me. There's one that was the queering up.
Yes,
that was
excellent.
Just a really really wonder. And there was one about a LARP.
Yeah, live action role playing games, and go
Yes.
find your game in the world. And so
those are really nice messages. And those are, again, it didn't have to be a keynote, the sage on the stage and the oracle, but it was really from the peoples. So I thought that was really nice.
To me, that also connects with the multiple and intersecting identities. Michelle King had this as a strand of one of her talks, the multiple identities that each individual embodies. And LARP definitely fits in with that, because we've got our business identity where we go to work, we've got our family identity, we've got this, we've got all these intersecting identities, but we're still all the same person. And to me, that's, again, connecting to the silos, because each identity we have might be a silo in and of itself, but they're all part of us as one individual. So all these connections that we make, and then looking at all these sessions that exist throughout these 3 days, be it play, be it media, be it technology, be it just face-to-face, whether or not we have virtually connecting or not, having these connections with all these different parts.
And to really come up from that, Michelle King had a very unique way of telling a story. And that's what I see that make it to connect to the audience much more, because now from what where our background and all that, to a sugarberry, and kind of like, it's kind of like, connect with people, because the real deal about life is it's non-linear. At every point in time, you pick up things, you have experiences that could actually form part of your story and could resonate with other people. Before you connect with audiences, they want to know if you are in the same level with them. And that's what I see Michelle did. At the end of the day, by the time she come up and she said something, like you talked about Beyonce, and when she said that, people were like, oh, someone said, oh, hi. I'm like, the ability to share a story gets us connected back to the audience that we're relating with. And it's so powerful, because I've actually seen that during the Ignite sessions, some of the presenters were kind of like saying something. I was actually outside the hall, but when I was looking at the screen, somewhere really so amazing. I left what I was doing. I was like, okay, yeah, this and that. It's really made a lot of sense to know how to properly share your story so that it connects with your audience. Then whatever you want to do, either get passing out an information or learning, it goes on very well. But if you lose your audience from kind of like not presenting the story appropriately, then nothing really gets into it. And that's what I'm actually saying.
What's really remarkable about this is we're sitting here in a format we call virtually connecting. And I think you haven't gone 2 sentences without using the word connecting, which of course I really, it's really incredible, because I wanted to ask those of you here, were any of you familiar with virtually connecting before this? And then just any thoughts that you have about what we're trying to do, which is, we call our format the Global Electronic Campfire. And I'm just curious, any reflections you'd have about what we're trying to do, which is to allow these connections with people who would like to be in Boston at this conference but can't be there for whatever reason. And there's so many reasons: economic, personal, cultural, physical, legal, so many boundaries that prevent people from connecting face to face as much as they might like to. And so we're trying to provide another channel by which people can do that. So I'm really interested in any of your reflections on connecting in this format.
Okay, let me come first. Sorry. I knew about VC through Maha. I think I've forgotten where. There was something else shared online, and kind of like, okay, I just got on. So I had some time in the office, so I got onto the conversation, and I kind of like, oh, that's good and all that. And from then on, okay, I saw Ma's daughter. She used to talk a lot about her daughter and all that, So from then she was kind of like, hey, John, would you join us for this and that? So now, what virtually connecting is actually doing is really remarkable, because now it presents because now we have been able to talk about our perspective of what we learned from the conference. And for someone that's actually seated there listening to us, they are actually getting so much more from what because we've been able to kind of like, okay, this is what was said and this is what I got out of it. So when we all share it, it forms a learning tool, or so much a package for the audience. And that's the power of what virtual connecting is. And because of the fact that it's going to be recorded and people will be able to have access to the materials or the videos and all that, it's kind of like a connecting point for them that were not able to be here, because for whatever reasons, like what you said, people might not be able to come around, but if there's a way or the platform to which they can still connect with what is going on there, perfect. And it's kind of like connects learning continually wherever we are, which is very important.
I was saying as we were coming into this is a version of what I've been dreaming about for a while. This sort of person in a box or conference in a box, that we could send somewhere, because I've done this. I've attended conferences virtually myself because I couldn't be there. I've literally sent a microphone, and instructions to another place and said, okay, I'm gonna plug in because I've got a kid here or whatever. He's gonna go or I'm working somewhere. I've got to do something, and had very meaningful conference experiences myself by just having somebody set up a camera and Zoom, from both knowing what was going on in the whole to literally having hallway conversations because I was just there and people would wave and I would talk. So I've been interested in capitalizing on that in one way or another and expanding it. It's really exciting to see that happening through virtually connecting, and interested in getting more involved with that, connected with that.
And I'll mention that was exactly the roots of virtually connecting, because it was Meha wanted to be at a conference and she knew Rebecca and said, hey, could you take your iPad and just like show it around and show me what's going on? So that it is exactly your experience was exactly the roots of
that's fascinating. It'd be great to think about that more together. I'd love to play that out. I also want to note just for myself that especially appropriate in this conference, but in general, just the phenomenon right here of what we have just done or are doing is also really interesting. So especially in a conference where we're all talking about connecting, I feel like we're doing unexpected sort of serendipitous connection here in a different way than this is different than the hallway conversation that we might be having upstairs. And it's also different than the kind of small group, let's get together and report out something that might happen at other conferences in various points too. And I think that's, imagine this, right? Because it's an authentic task, right? So we're both ruminating on the conference, but also being forced to reflect about the experience of the conference and the meaning in a way that interprets it for somebody else. And you don't get that. Like maybe you get that if there's a panel and everybody else is experiencing the panel. If you have a small group, you're talking about your own somethings, or it's a self-chosen whatever. But this should be what connected learning should probably force. It would be great to have everybody at the next summit in like a randomly forced group doing 25 of these simultaneously in some way, with no need for no report outs, but like forced you to be in a room to reflect authentically about what was going on and realize that holy crap, connections are like we're doing it right now. Oh my god, it's very interesting.
I had kind of similar but different perspective that I am definitely going to feel a sense of closeness to the people that we're sitting here that we're meeting. But having something like this where you do this during the conference rather than on the last day, like at the end of each day, and you bring together a circle of the librarians or a circle of teachers or a circle of heads of school or the circle of developers. And so they can share their kind of joint perspectives on that. I love the idea that we're doing a synthesis right now, and there are other channels on the website. So the keynotes are recorded. You don't necessarily see the slides or the audience reaction, but you have that. I've also been following the Twitter feeds, but oftentimes you see the same tweet of, the same picture with multiple things. So it takes a while to go through there. But the little bits and pieces that can can you can follow, but it's nice to have the sort of synthesis, the time to reflect, which we know supports learning, and to synthesize that with colleagues. So I would say yes, and let's try to do this with other small groups during the conference. I think would be lovely.
And
I think there were how many? There were 3 or 4 during the conference. Do you know, Joe, how many we had during this conference?
Sessions? We had 2.
Yeah, I mean, we typically average 1 to 2 a day during the course of the conference. So there might be 4 to 6 in a typical conference. It depends a lot on how many volunteers we can get who have the time to make it happen.
I think you've got a really neat idea, though, that it's right. So National Public Radio has an All Songs Considered podcast, and when they, I'm forgetting the name of it, but when they go to the Austin City Limits Music Festival, they record these little mini episodes at the end of each day. That's just, so what did you see? Because I saw this thing, and these guys were great. And I'm thinking that that's a really neat idea, and something that I think Virtually Connecting would have to think about a little, your idea of doing it by affinity groups, which is something that we've shied away from, but that doesn't mean it's not valuable.
Right, right.
You know, I think we've gone for that cross-pollination, but it would kind of be interesting to get a room full of people who shared some component of an identity where they could reflect on it as here's what our experience of this conference as it's going on is like now. That's a really neat suggestion we should think about.
I agree.
I agree. We all play Minecraft.
Right. I think there's a lot of potential there, but also each time we do this and we create this enthusiasm for this work, more people will communicate to their friends and colleagues about it. So when we try to organize Virtually Connecting, often we don't have the connections to talk to the people that we want to because they don't know who we are. But now that you have this enthusiasm, perhaps you'll
happy to spread the word.
Yes, exactly.
Well, right, and I feel like there are different. This conference might be an interesting one to play with some different formats at, if only because of the open-minded nature, but also kind of the inherent connection thing. You know, it would be. I'm just intrigued by whether it's affinity groups or not. By the notion of like, this is the hour when we're all going to tell the world what this conference is about in small groups. And like the idea of a shared communal distributed, small group experience and something like everybody would just go in, like, we're not reporting about anything, but all at the same time, we're going to be in small groups connecting with somebody else, talking about like, if we knew that everybody else in the conference were also doing this right now, and then we just let it happen, whatever. It might be very interesting. It might not work, I don't know, but it would be interesting to have sort of forced connection.
Idea.
Can I jump in here? I'm Annabelle from Carolina, and I just walked into a Virtually Connecting strategizing session. I love this idea, except I would do it like 1 hour every day, because the thing is, to get a volunteer to do the virtual and to get the virtual participants takes up a lot of effective labor from us.
Right.
So we can't do all the time. Like right now, there are 2 conferences happening at the same time.
Yep.
This one and Digital Pedagogy Lab. And so between us trying to make sure that we have enough people and that we're promoting the event and getting everyone, it gets difficult. Right. But I think if once a day, or 1 or twice a day, but there are particular times that the conference decides these are the times for Virtually Connecting, and folks know ahead of time those are the times they can jump in. That's actually a really neat idea. Occasionally, we don't usually structure them to do particular affinity groups, but every now and then we might. Like, so I know that these 2 people work in that field, so we'll try to get them on the same session if it works out. But it doesn't always work out, right? Sometimes someone's there for only a day, or they're giving sessions at the same time the other person's free or whatever. But if it's something done at the conference organization level from the very beginning, the way the entire conference schedules itself could be different, I guess, if the conference wants to be friends.
Well, I think that's
nice to hear your voice, Maha.
Just to echo, I mean, this is hopefully beneficial for the audience, but selfishly, I just echo that it's beneficial for me. I can speak more, and I think other people might feel the same way, that it's really interesting for me, even knowing that I was going to be talking about this. I was thinking about my perspective on the sessions differently, even as an audience member or a presenter or whatever. So that was kind of a fun, different little take for it too. So just as a kind of shout out to you guys, you know, that sort of gave me, like, I benefited from it as well, you know, and so participation was its own reward. So that was really fun as well.
Ditto.
I'm so glad.
There was one person who, just before she gave feedback in this morning session, she mentioned that she was totally fangirling. And I have met, met in air quotes through MOOCs, some of the individuals who work in games and learning. And I tend to not be the kind of person that's going to go up to somebody and say, like, hey, how's it going? I have got friends who are like that and just like drop a dime. It's like, he's off. He's going to meet people. I'm not that person. So having people in the small room opens it up, lowers that affective filter that prevents people who are a little shy, a little more introverted, a little what, I don't know, to connect with people. And I find that valuable.
And I think we a couple of thoughts and fantastic reflections. Meha, you're going to want to go back and watch this one, as you almost always do. There was a lot of fascinating comments, but I was thinking about Meha's comment about the work it takes to do these sessions. But I think, as we were talking about, there's such a playfulness around virtually connecting that people don't see how much work it is. It just looks like we're having fun, because we are having fun. And I think of, you know, I think one of the kind of godfathers of all this work, I think of Alan Kay, and he used to always talk about hard fun. You know, the best fun is hard fun. And so virtually connecting is hard fun. It's fun, but it's hard too to keep it going. You know,
So,
especially.
So I would encourage some, you know, thinking on the back end about strategizing, especially if there's a vessel like this conference, and people are really trying to figure out how to form this conference in some interesting new ways. You know, the notion of the ownership that that Judy was talking about, you could flip that on its side too. I mean, you could imagine that at the beginning there was a train the trainers section, you know, for, you know, you got 600 people. So was the sixth, we're going to have, you know, we're going to have 10 of these groups, 20 of these groups or something like that across the session. And so we need, you know, 15, 20 people who are going to be trained as facilitators for this. And they're going to help lead the something, and it's all going to be recorded, whether or not there's a virtual person there or not. You might be able to virtually create the virtually connecting something. And on the one hand, that might let you do it in parallel. On the other hand, it might, you know, you're evangelizing 10 times as much then as well about what virtually connecting does. So, you know, there might think about ways to scale within a conference, even perhaps.
Well, I would just mention that the only way we scale, we're a completely voluntary collective of individuals. So the way we scale is people like you saying, "Hey, I'd like to take this on." So you know, you're all welcome. Right. And to work with us and take on new things and bring in new ideas, because they're really, we have a very general manifesto. Beyond that, there's really no rules for virtually connecting, and we're constantly trying new things. So,
right.
Please join us and try it out, and let's see what happens.
I think there's also. Go ahead.
No, you. Go ahead.
There were two strands that I was thinking of. One was, there's a sense of flow, not in the sort of psychological sense of flow, but a sense of being able to go from place to place here and connect with people. It doesn't feel as structured. There is structure at this summit, but it allows you to experiment and find new people. But I think that 2-hour time block for lunch, I think, was kind of instrumental. Some people saw it really great, and some people were thinking in the mindsets like, oh man, 2 hours until the next session, what do I do? So it's that unstructured playtime that people don't quite know what to do with, because they come from a more formal conference sort of experience. And I think if this connect was be connecting in that, I'd like to say a big thanks to Ed Gargapoulos for organizing this on site, because having done this just once, I know how much hard work it is on site to figure out a room, figure out if the Wi-Fi is good enough, figure out microphone issues, trying to herd cats is what came to mind, but it's not herd cats. Find all the people who are coming to the physical presence. And it's a lot of work. It's a labor of love, but all this happens because it's a labor of love from a variety of people, including some of the local hosts who help us find these rooms.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
I guess it takes a community. I wasn't sure where I was going with this, but a big thank you to Greg.
Oh,
Yeah,
thank
no,
you.
it's
Please,
absolutely huge.
Not
Right.
needed. Not needed.
Yeah,
It was
and-
my pleasure.
Yeah, and the pushing that I'm doing is to experiment with institutionalizing it, if only within, say, a conference like this. But what would it mean to? I mean, what we're saying is, oh, it's such a pain inside a conference to find spaces and people and assign something. And what we're almost saying is like, boy, it's so hard to throw a conference inside a conference when you're at a conference. But like, what if we leverage the conference to make this happen? Like, the conference is finding spaces and people and some things and whatever. So we might not have to work upstream, at least in this particular conference. In fact, when we're seeing that so much value comes to the participants as well, if we could keep on maintaining that spirit in some way, it might be really interesting. And then you might get a toolkit out of it, like what's the virtual connecting X that could be, more easily spread in a conference that wants to do this because of the benefits to the attendees.
I don't know if this morning's keynote conversation was recorded or streamed, but it sort of reminds me, shoot, I'm on video?
Yeah.
I should have thought that better.
Yeah, right.
Anyway, it reminds me of a fireside chat because this is sort of like a fireside chat. So if the conference organizers are already thinking about fireside chat, this is kind of along that same paradigm. It's a more intimate discussion, with you and 20 of your best friends.
So folks, I really appreciate this. We've talked about things that are deeply resonant with work that I've been doing all summer and will be doing in the fall, and it's been hugely productive. And I want to thank you for your generosity of time. And you've been very generous at it because it doesn't feel like an hour, but we've been at this for an hour. And one thing we have not talked about is, again, as you've been so thoughtful about the conference, I would like to give you, a moment, for if there's some work that you would like to tell us about your work and where to find it, things that you've done that you're proud of that you'd like us to have a look at. I'd just kind of like to shift quickly in our closing moments and give you an opportunity to point us towards some of your other wonderful thoughts.
I'll speak for us. We're happy to connect with anybody who wants to, think about how people can learn science, math, and engineering in ways that use technology to its fullest. The Concord Consortium's work is free, open source, and available at concord.org. And it's been at the heart of some of the conversations we've had here. So that's I won't say more than that.
I did a workshop on the first day in the afternoon related to playful, tangible, connected learning, and brought together some folks from the maker tradition and who are doing computationally enabled making, and brought a bunch of cardboard robots. But my hope is that I'd want to bring more creative engineering and get more kids engaged in engineering activities who are kind of your non-usual suspects through kind of low-cost means. And so if you go to papermech.net, that's a research project that I'm working on.
Great. Wow, I have my hands in a lot of different pots, so I'll try to just encapsulate it all and say, if you're interested, you can go to the Education Arcade, education.mit.edu, and see a whole bunch of projects from our lab with Eric Klopfer as our PI. He's one of the organizers of the conference. And I'll give a little plug for Tailblazer, TALEBLAZER.org, which is a toolkit for making and playing location-based games. So I think it's hopefully in sort of the ways to connect maybe with your community and making games collaboratively and for others is a nice maybe connection to some of the thoughts that I'm thinking about. And I'll bring back to the project work that I do in ways that we can sort of maybe empower and enable people to make cool things in their communities.
Last week, the Commonwealth of Learning released a toolkit that I authored. It's about learning how to use Scratch from scratch, basically. It doesn't require any prerequisites. Anyone can actually pick up the material and go from there to learn how to, code to learn, whatever, So, and the link is on my Twitter, and I've pinned it on my Twitter, so you can actually see the link DBELOVED. So it's going to be available. So that's one. Then second thing is that I talked about last week. I talked about storytelling with Scratch, and I had 4 years that I was actually playing around with. Everybody has got experience, so it starts from experience. It starts from not coding, but from experiences. Then we talk about expressing the experience, and that means you talk about it. You can actually go ahead and script it, then make a storyboard out of it that starts to come like games and all that. Then you'll be able to employ Scratch. So that's the third E. And when you employ Scratch, it's kind of like it animates your story and brings your story alive, and then you get empowered with it because you can actually share the story on the community. Scratch has got an online community that's huge and keeps growing. And with that, it empowers stories of people from different perspectives. And other people can actually, part of empowerment is the fact that other people can actually pick up the story and remix it and all that. So that's my angle of what I've seen Scratch, what it has been, because I've been on it and I've seen that happen. So it's kind of like from experience to express to employ to empower, so I'll be pushing more information about that afterwards.
That's great.
Great.
Well, grand. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Greg, and everybody.
Joe and Michael.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much.
Yeah, very
It
much.
was lots of fun.
Thank you.
Right. And with that, I am going to stop the broadcast. And thanks for joining us on Virtually Connecting.
Thank you.